I have a magnifying glass on me because in a lot of ways I do represent the Black community because there's no one else here, right? So if I act out a certain way, or if I'm a great employee, or I do this, it's going to affect other Blacks or future Black employees. That's the mindset, right? So that carries a lot of weight. That's right. It carries a lot of weight. It's very stressful. It's a very uneasy feeling that I live with in that kind of situation on a day-to-day basis when I show up to my job, right? When I'm in meetings, when I'm at these town halls, it's not a comfortable feeling. So in that case, yeah, it's very stressful in those kind of environments. Absolutely.
Welcome in to Menfolk Journeys, the podcast of great conversations with men. I'm your host, Chris Foster, and we're going to explore how we wear this beautiful and confusing mantle of manhood in the 21st century. Look, I get it. In public life, a lot of men are knuckleheads. But in private life, we can be thoughtful and we can be reflective if we have the right conversation, if we feel comfortable talking about our story. And we all have a great story to tell. And we can all learn from those stories. We can learn about who we've been, who we are, and who we want to be. And that's why we're going to have this conversation, so we can learn from other men just like us. And today we're going to have a conversation with my friend Parish. This is a real, open, honest talk about his own Black experience. He talks about inclusion. He talks about equality. He talks about diversity. And how his experience has left him some really interesting and impactful lessons that he can also teach his sons. It's a fantastic conversation with a great man. I hope you enjoy it. Welcome in to Menfolk Journeys. Well, all right. Well, Dr. Parish Jefferson, welcome in.
Thank you, Chris. I'm happy to be here.
All right. Why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So, my name is Parish Jefferson. I'm 58 years old, and I currently live in San Diego, California. I was actually born in San Francisco, California. I live here with my beautiful wife, and I would say sometimes with my 22-year-old twin boys when they're home from college. they live here with us as well. And I currently am the center manager for the Sanford Center for Regenerative Medicine Consortium. And I also teach courses at the University of UC San Diego as well. Usually teaching university or organizational leadership and some organizational diversity classes and a few other ones sprinkled in there.
That's fantastic. And you recently have a book.
Yes, I do. My book.
Yes. So your book is called If DEI Could Talk. And I really want to just jump into this first question. You've spent a good part of your time, your purpose, your energy, and your devotion to writing a book about a topic that, from my perspective, appears to be widely misunderstood, right? Why do you think a DEI topic is misunderstood? And then we'll move on from there.
Wow. It's a great question. I'm going to say, this may sound a little negative, but I think a lot of times it's intentionally misunderstood. Not a lot of times, but some of the time, meaning that I do believe that some people at their core understand what DEI is, but they're listening to outside messaging or maybe some incorrect information, and they're using it kind of as a trigger for DEI to kind of bring it down. And then other times I do think that it's just generally misunderstood, that people actually do not know what DEI is. Frequently in my profession, when they find out I'm a DEI professional or DEI advocate, they'll ask me, why do you support DEI? And I always ask them, one of the first questions I say is, do you know what DEI is? And a lot of people will say, yeah, I do. And I ask them, well, what is it? And I find that their answers are either wrong, they're misinformed, or they will just kind of throw their hands up and they don't really know what it is and don't want to even try to answer. So it's always an interesting conversation with people. And I do find that when I do actually engage with people and have the discussion with them about what DEI is, one of two things happen. They either say to me, you make DEI sound so positive, but everything I hear about it's negative. Like, why do you make it sound so positive? So, which opens up an interesting conversation. Or the second thing I hear from them is that, well, that's not what DEI is. And I always respond to them, well, I honestly just spent the last 5 years of my life, getting a PhD in this and studying it. I think I understand what DEI is. And if you
Sure.
want to really understand what it is, I'd be more than happy to engage and have that conversation with you. So I do always try to approach it from a position of awareness and education, so that I can help people understand truly what DEI is. And also, more importantly, what DEI is not.
What it is not, right.
Yeah.
So DEI, just from the acronym, is diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Mm-hmm.
From what I know as a human being, just working around the world, inclusion is a pretty good thing, right? You want to include other people in dialogue, conversations. Equity seems to me kind of a foundational human belief that we moved towards, right?
Mm-hmm.
Since at least we started writing about equity, right?
Yep.
In terms of,
Yep.
people, trying to get a level playing field. And then diversity, well, that's a pretty interesting topic too, because diversity is, I don't know, from my perspective, Parish, diversity could be diversity of thought, diversity of experiences, diversity of backgrounds, diversity of family. You could have a lot of ethnic homogeneity, but still a lot of diversity.
Yeah.
I can't believe that the Japanese culture is not diverse. I think it's extraordinarily diverse.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Even though it's a homogenous culture, there's a lot of different, stratus. There's a lot of different status. There's a lot of different, experiences, right?
Yeah.
So I think that, we are so comfortable with packaging things, and we, especially in the United States, want to package and want to label because it makes it, I guess, simpler for us to identify, to accept or reject or have an opinion on it. So I'm curious as to if you think that's happened with this concept of when someone says, do you think that diversity, equity, and inclusion is a good thing? I would think that without any labeling attached or any politics attached or any conversation attached, 99 out of 100 people would say, yeah,
Yeah.
I think that that's a fine thing. There's
Yeah.
nothing quite wrong with that. So I'm curious as to how this happened to this idea.
Yeah. That's a great question. It is. It's interesting because, and I think initially when I kind of not started on the journey, but I'll say I was part way through the journey, I would always say people, I'd say, well, don't call it DEI. Say diversity, equity, inclusion, and then tell me which one of those words you have the problem with. And right, that was the kind of approach I would have because you're right. When you just look at those three words and what they actually mean, it's positive. There's nothing negative about it. Everybody supports that, right? But when they drop it to that acronym DEI, they associate everything with it. And let me tell you a quick story here. About a week and a half ago, I was out in Colorado visiting a really good friend of mine. I've grown up with him since college. Actually, I've known him a very long time, and we're still really close. He's Jewish. You wouldn't know. He looks white, but he's Jewish, right? That was culture. His son happened to be in town from college visiting. He goes to Gonzaga up in Pacific Northwest.
Catholic school, as a note.
Yeah. So we started, we Rich, my friend, hope it's okay I use this first name, but my friend, he told me, he said, hey, let's because I really want to talk to you with my son because he's had some concerns about DEI. So I said, yeah, let's talk about it. So his son went on to tell me about a story where one of his professors, basically in his class, was talking basically to him, according to what he said, made him feel like he was the devil and that he was to blame for all the injustices and all the inequalities that are happening in America because he's a white cis male. And he just thought it was very offensive and thought it was wrong. And, I listened to him and I stopped and I said to him, I agree with you. And more importantly, that's not DEI. I said, I don't know why you're tagging that as DEI. That's this man's opinion, but that's not DEI. He goes, well, he talks about, diversity and the importance of it. And I said, I understand that. I said, but you can't just label things DEI because it deals with some inequalities and injustices. I said, I would try to dive a little deeper and understand. I said, and secondly, what that professor did, in my opinion, is wrong. I said, I don't think you should go out to shame anyone or make anyone feel bad because that's not what it is. And I said, and more importantly, you're included in DEI. And he's, what do you mean? And I say, don't you have I don't want to get into too much personal, but he has a neurology disorder.
Sure.
And I said, that's part of diversity. Going back to what you said earlier, I said, diversity is not just about race, religion, ethnicity. There's all parts of diversity. I said, and your diversity could be your neurodivergency that you have. And that's something that you could qualify as being part of diverse, right? I said, because we want different perspectives, we want different backgrounds, experiences. So don't just look at it as a race thing. And that's kind of where our conversation started.
Right.
It got a lot deeper. It went on for probably a couple of hours. We had some really good conversations, but a lot of it was about educating him and helping him understand what it actually means and what diversity, equity, inclusion includes and who it includes.
And who it includes. It seems to me that you have a lot of conversations like this where someone asks you, right, what does it actually mean? So, and I'm sure you've been thinking about it for a while. And for some ideas and books are kind of in people for years, decades, et cetera, before it finally, quote unquote, comes out. Was this book in you for quite a long time?
I feel that it was, and I don't think I knew it was. I guess is the short answer to it. I've been taking notes, I'll say, and journaling probably for 5+ years, maybe a little bit longer, just on experiences, thoughts I had, kind of things I wanted to elaborate on or dive deeper into. And so I've been kind of compiling all this information over these years. And, when I was going for my PhD, obviously I was 100% invested in that. So I wasn't even thinking about the book, but I ended my dissertation, and all of a sudden there's this moment where you realize I have nothing to do. Like, I don't have to write any papers. I don't have to do any research. So I sat down, I started looking over my notes, and it just started flowing. Everything that had been in my head all this time, all my experiences just started coming out. Yeah. So I feel it was there.
And it almost seemed to come out of your life. And I want to talk about that a little bit later, because you have some really compelling personal life stories that I'm super curious about. Yeah. But before we do that, I read the book, which is fantastic. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
And one thing that struck me, and if this lands if this question lands poorly or sounds terrible, I don't mean it to. But in your book, you use initial caps for white and black when describing people. I thought that was pretty interesting. I was like, as a young black child, I was like, okay. Why do you initial cap white and black in the context of this book?
Well, one of the great things about doing a dissertation, but I don't know if there is anything great. Cut halfway joking, but you do a lot of research, right? And I think the person, she's a journalist. I think her name was Lori Tharps, and I'm hoping I'm getting her name correctly. That I had done some research, and she had said at the time that black with a capital B recognizes the kind of humanity and contributions to the world of black people. Black with a lowercase b is just a color. So that stuck with me at that time. And as I went learning more about it, I felt the same thing about white, right? If you're using white with a lowercase, it's just a color. But when you capitalize it, it attaches everything that comes along with it, right? So when you look at the term black, capital B, and the term white, capital W, now you see the meaning behind it, all the context that comes along, all the privilege or distinct qualities, all of that stuff that is along with it.
That's what I experienced, right? Yeah. Because that becomes black with a capital B. Like you said, it signifies something more, right? Yes. And so there's this incredible book called The N-Word of God, and it's write that down. It is I'll find it off my shelf and I'll show it. It is a picture book, and it's staggeringly imaginative. I've never read anything like it before in my whole life. And, it might not fall to everybody's tastes, but because it was so interesting and so compelling and so beautifully illustrated, I just think it's one of the greater pieces of art that I've seen.
Yeah.
And he has this page where he talks about black and white, and he has a black page and a white page, the color. And he says, well, put your hand over one. So I put my hand over the white page, and I'm like, I'm kind of goldeny, freckly, little peachy,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Right. And if you're African American or you're
Yeah.
Dominican, or if you're black and you put your hand
Hmm.
over it, you're
You're
not
not black.
black,
No.
right? Because the
Uh-huh.
colors stands. So
Yeah.
that's what I thought was so interesting. And in this book, what he talks about is, you know, that as soon as you capitalize that letter and you throw this connotation out there, you have a perspective of kind of these two separate cultures.
Mm.
And
Mm.
what really struck me, Parish, was when I was reading the book, and you have a moment when you're a boy and you kind of talk about these two separate cultures, and you kind of felt that.
Mm-hmm.
You had a story about when you go into a store
Yep.
with a white friend,
Mm-hmm.
which is a totally different experience than if you go into the store with a fellow black friend.
Yes. Yes.
And I was like, oh, now I get that capitalization. I get this idea
Mm-hmm.
of two different cultures, because
Yep.
that's kind of what you were feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. You know, that came up in the conversation I was talking about with my friend's son as well. Cause, you know, it's interesting when you talk to someone that comes from a place of privilege. Now, his parents are very wealthy. He grew up in a very nice home in Colorado, went to private school. Parents, you know, gave him counseling and tutoring and everything so he can go to SATs, now at a private school in Gonzaga. You know, parents sent him a lot of money. He has his own brand new car. He's very, very well off. But when you try to make him understand his privileges and the privileges he had or has against people from the inner city, that's where you see the friction begin. Like they acknowledge that there's privilege, but they don't think that it gives them an advantage. Like he actually was telling me that he thought I had more of an advantage being an African American than he did being a white person. And so it was an interesting conversation, but it's hard to make people understand what the experience is like living as a black man in America. It's a hard thing to explain, right? Because the same actual friend that him and I have had conversations before, and he'll say to me, you know, Parish, you have a great job. You have a home in San Diego, you know, you make good money, you're educated. He goes, I don't understand why you would have these experiences. And I said, well, when I walk out the door and I don't wear a name tag over me, I am a PhD, I have this car, you know, whatever it is. All they see is a large black man, right? And all the misconceptions and stereotypes that come along with it. So I always think it's important. I think it's important that we acknowledge this is reality. I'm not saying I always tell people when I'm talking, I don't want you to think that I'm ever blaming you for your white privilege or blaming you for injustices that happen. It's not your fault. I don't want you to think of it that way, but I want you to be aware of the struggles and challenges that I have on a daily basis that you don't deal with because people don't see you as a category, as a certain person because of the color of your skin. So that's one of the things I really try to stress as much as I can with people. And that's what I was trying to capture in the book. That's why I used a lot of storytelling, because I felt if I could take people into my lived experiences, that maybe it would resonate a little more, maybe it would make more sense with them. And they could start saying, okay, I understand. I can see how that can be challenging. I can see how that can, cause this kind of a loss of self as you grow up.
Sure. No, I understand. And I think that the idea that and one of our guests, David, and the show's titled David and the Responsibility of Privilege. So he knew that he was privileged. He had a fantastic home growing up, super stable family, private educations, and he took advantage of all of that, right? To have the best life possible for him.
Yes.
And he was like, I didn't necessarily know I was privileged when I was 7, 8, 9, 10, because it's the only life I've lived. It's all I know. Right. Yeah, and it's kind of like when I was telling my girls who grew up in San Diego, I said, I totally expect you to take living in San Diego for granted because it's all you know. Right.
Exactly.
And will expose you to other experiences. And even if you say, oh my gosh, I'm lucky, those aren't other lived experiences. Like this is the only lived experience you have. And everyone has their own lived experiences. And when they're born into it, they're not responsible for the life that they're born into. And it was very interesting, when you said that growing up, because it took me back to my childhood. And so I grew up in Pittsburgh, and my elementary school was East Hills Elementary School. And it was a completely diverse elementary school, right? In fact, my very first friends were African-American friends. And I'm like, okay, that's cool because we're just 5, right? We're 5 and 6 and we're just playing and it's normal and it's okay. And I didn't quite start, understanding like the sense of two different cultures until I got a little bit older.
Yeah.
And growing up in Pittsburgh too, it's a very neighborhoody kind of city where there are different neighborhoods connected to one another. But it's a very European, very Jewish city. So there's a minority of African-American populations in the city. Yeah. And so as I grew up, when I left the elementary school and kind of moved into these various neighborhoods that my folks moved into, the diversity of my friendship, the ethnic diversity of my friendships really dwindled and became right. Yeah. And so, and I contrast that with my daughters, and they went to a high school here in San Diego as the SCPA, fantastic school. It's an audition-only performing arts school. It's a public school. But there wasn't a single ethnic majority in that school.
Oh, wow.
And in their formative years, that's what they were used to.
Yeah.
So I guess I would ask you then, in those formative years when you're young, does where you live and who you're friends with really help shape your perspective of this different kind of culture?
That's a great question. I believe it does. Now, I moved from San Francisco to the East Bay when I was 7. So I primarily grew up in the East Bay in that environment that I kind of describe in the book. So that's what my perspective is. But I remember when I went away to college, I went down to UCLA first freshman and sophomore year. So moving from a little town in the East Bay down to Los Angeles was, I'll call it a culture shock.
Of course it was.
It's fair to call it. And even speaking of that, even the more ironic piece of that was that I was actually living in Inglewood because I didn't get into the dorms. I didn't have a place to live. So I was staying with my godfather in Inglewood and commuting via bus to UCLA. Exactly. So it was a 2.5 hour morning for me to get to campus each day.
Shut the front door.
Right.
Parish.
And here I was only 17 when this was going on. So, and this is, you're talking back in the mid 80s. So, Bloods and Crips and everything else was real. It was really happening. So that was I'm going to call it an awakening to me. I think some of the experiences that I had in LA, the culture clashes, and some of the race relationships that were kind of straight at the time that you would see. And then going into Inglewood, which was at the time a predominantly Black city, and being there and experiencing that. So all of that was new to me. And all of that, I think, did shape who I am and kind of how I see the world. But at that same time, I want to say this. My mom, bless her heart, was so instrumental in who I am today. And I dedicated actually a chapter in that book to her, which I wrote about her because it was her strength and her, I'm just going to say empathetic nature that I think taught me to kind of accept all people and live life through more of a curious lens than a judgmental lens.
I remember that's the ticket. Keep going.
Yeah. I remember early on being with my mom, and she always treated, whether you were a janitor or the principal of the school, she was going to treat you exactly the same. It didn't matter. She was going to show you the same level of respect and really treat you like a human, right? And that always resonated with me. I saw how she interacted with people. I saw people maybe challenge her or say things maybe that could upset her or could make her respond in negative light. And she never did. She always stayed positive. She always tried to really take things from a position that, well, I don't know what's going on in that person's life. There may be something going on that's causing them to act like this. So I'm not going to act out on it, right? So I took that. I learned from that. So I know it's a long way of answering kind of the question you have, but I definitely believe that where you grow up, the cultures you experience with influence kind of how you grow up and who you ultimately become.
I would think so. I think that is inevitable. I think that look, when when kids are 4 years old, they all believe in Santa Claus because they're told Santa Claus is real, and everybody believes in Santa Claus. So I guess I'm going to believe in Santa Claus, right? So I don't think you can discount that influence. And a question that I would have for you about Inglewood, if you said it's a predominantly, Black community, did you feel more comfortable in that community than you did maybe in the East Bay, which was predominantly white?
Yeah. So you touched on something really interesting there, because the short answer would be no, because I wasn't as familiar with being around predominantly Black environments, right? So it was new for me.
That's interesting.
Right? So I got at this point really, I'm going to say, this is kind of where I learned code switching. And at the time, there wasn't really a term for it. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with the term code switch.
So here's the thing. I am familiar with it, but please walk us through.
Yeah. So code switching is when a person kind of changes the way they talk, act, or present themselves depending on the situation or environment they're in. So as an African American or Black male, I could be around my Black friends and act a different way or one way, but get me around a white group of friends and I'm going to act a completely different. It's funny because I remember one of a friend of mine in college, who was a roommate of mine, he once he referred to me as a chameleon. Now this was when he had first met me, and he again, we didn't have the term code switching back then, but he called me a chameleon. I said, "What do you mean?" He was, "You act so different when you're around your Black friends, just the way you talk and the way you act, your gestures, everything's different than when you're around white people." And I said, well, yeah. And it's interesting because I think in a lot of ways, growing up as an African-American or Black individual, you don't maybe, I'm trying to say subconsciously, you may not even realize you're doing that. It's almost a survival mechanism that you've kind of adapted through your life, right? And it's something you just learn to do. And so back to that question, I think that's where things started happening, where I started getting around more Black environments and seeing the Black culture and really getting experience the Black culture, right? Going to the barbecues. Barbecues in Inglewood on a weekend were wild. They were crazy, I can tell you. Right?
Capital B different. Barbecue.
Yeah, very different. So getting to experience that, and then heading back to UCLA campus where I'm around a completely different group of people, right?
Sure.
So I think that's where I started developing this ability to kind of move in and out of these different environments and fit into the ones I was in.
Sure. So. Is that that's interesting. That's a lot of pressure. I think that not to the same degree. I think that there's some part of people where they adjust slightly based on different social circumstances or situations. If I, so like I said, growing up in Pittsburgh, my dad lived in Butler, and he ran the psychiatric and drug and alcohol rehabilitation center for Butler Memorial Hospital, which is a small city north of Pittsburgh. And I grew up there in the Pittsburgh in the 70s, 80s. And in the 80s, the steel industry collapsed in Western Pennsylvania. And Butler was a heart of that, right? So it was a devastating moment for that city. And my dad, of course, was treating somebody or somebody's friend or anybody. So in the town, when we would walk around Butler, everyone would say, "Hey, Dr. Foster." "Hi, Dr. Foster," because he was in it, right?
Yep.
And I would actually, and I don't think this is the degree of code switching that you're talking about, to be fair, but I would be a little bit different around that group and around steelworkers and around laborers. And I worked construction for a little bit and was a little bit different around them than I might have been around, my professors or some other, places that I was. And I know that to do that, to kind of fit into to a place that you're in, it takes some work. Yeah. So it takes adjustments, and you have to be conscious of it. And it's a little bit of pressure, right? It's a little bit of stress. And my experience with that is a minute example compared to what you would go through. So I guess I ask you, Parish, in the code switch environment, is that stressful?
I'm going to say at times, yes. I think sometimes it happens at more a subconscious level, right? It just happens naturally. Like I don't even think about it. But there are times where I notice that I'm in a very different environment, right? And I feel that I have to act or behave a certain way. So when I was working at a large tech company up in the Pacific Northwest, and I remember I joined a department organization, and there were about 500 people in the organization. And I started right before we had our first town hall. And I remember walking into this big auditorium where we do these town halls yearly, where everybody comes together, and the VP over the organization comes and kind of talks about our strategies and our priorities moving forward for the next year. And kind of it's like a rah-rah thing in a way to get everybody excited about the upcoming year. And I walked into the room, and one of the things that you do as a I'm going to say as a black male, because I'm speaking for myself. Maybe other minorities do this as well. I don't know. But is you look around the room to see how many other people like you are there, right? Because that's our first level of, can I feel safe here? Or am I safe here, right? So you're looking around for those allies or those people who kind of your support system, I guess.
It's your support system. That's such an interesting phrase that you said. Do I feel safe here?
Yes.
Are there situations where you don't feel safe?
Yeah. So this instance, so I walked in, I looked around, and you're in an auditorium, there's 500 people, and I did not see another single African-American individual in that entire room. Now, it's an eye-opening experience. Now, in that case, I am conscious of it at that point, right? Where I'm like, okay, I'm the only one here. And I say one, I'm thinking of the only African-American. I feel, now whether this is justified or not, but based on my experience and my life experiences, I'm sitting there thinking to myself, okay, I have a magnifying glass on me, because in a lot of ways, I do represent the Black community, because there's no one else here, right?
Wow.
So if I act out a certain way, or if I'm a great employee, or I do this, it's going to affect other Blacks or future Black employees. That's the mindset, right? So that's
a lot of pressure.
Weight. That's right. It carries a lot of weight. It's very stressful. It's a very uneasy feeling that I live with in that kind of situation on a day-to-day basis. When I show up to my job, right? When I'm in meetings, when I'm at these town halls, it's not a comfortable feeling. So in that case, it's very stressful in those kind of environments.
We'll be right back. It's so interesting. You feel at some level, either deeply or at the surface, where like you're responsible for showcasing the Black experience, or it's just Parish's experience. It's not the Black, it's just exactly. Your experience.
Exactly.
Yet you feel like you've got to quote unquote represent.
Yeah. It's a weird position to be in. And it's, I think I'm trying to think. I don't know if I've talked about this in the book. I might have. I honestly, I can't remember if I did. But at social work school, this is one of the first times that I remember it vividly happening to me, right? This was about 20 years ago. I was getting my master's, and I was in a course, and we were talking about just cultural experiences, different cultural experiences, and different people were talking. And the teacher, actually professor at the University of Texas, she says to me, "Hey, Parish, I would love to hear from you and hear about the Black experience. Can you tell us about the Black experience?" And right?
You're like, I can tell you about the Parish experience. I can share that with you.
Yes, Chris, that's exactly what I responded.
Oh, you did?
I said, well, I chuckled. I said, well, I can tell you about the Parish experience, but I can't tell you about the Black experience. I can't speak for all Blacks. I can only tell you what I've experienced, right? I kind of laughed as I was saying
12, it.
Yeah,
for 100 million people today.
But it's interesting because it's not uncommon, and I think a part of what went into writing the book was a lot of my experiences in college, particularly, right? When I went to UCLA, and then I went on to UC Davis, two very prestigious universities here in California, right?
Great schools,
high academic schools. So when I and predominantly white at the time, back in the 80s. I think the demographics have changed a lot now, but back then it was. So a lot of people, I couldn't even count on both my hands and feet the number of people that told me, like, I'm the first Black friend they've had, or I'm the first time they've talked to a Black person, or I'm the first Black person they've ever went on a date with. All these different experiences were first for people. So in a lot of ways, I always felt like I am representing my race in that sense, right? I am like, if I show them something bad, they're going to associate it with Black people because this is their only experience they have.
Huh.
So yeah, it's one of those things you do carry with you for a period of time until you start learning how to navigate through that, I think, and not put that kind of pressure on yourself. But early on when you're young, you do feel that.
Wow. So now, speaking of young, you've got two young sons, right? You've got
Yes.
twin boys. You just said
Yeah.
22.
Yeah.
I have to believe that there's some kitchen table conversation going on about these type of topics or the things that you write about.
Yeah.
What kind of conversations do you have with them? And is their experience now in 2025 different than yours in 1980?
Man. This is such an emotionally layered question, right? I'll say this. You were right. I had some very deep and honest conversations with my kids growing up.
Okay.
But at the same time, I want my kids to be strong, independent men, right? I don't want them walking around looking over their shoulder or thinking someone's out to get them, right? Or not feeling safe in their skin. So you have both those conversations, right? I'm raising them to be strong, confident, independent men that can stand up for themselves and challenge injustices, right? But at the same time, I'm making them understand, hey, you're going to be seen differently at times, right? You're going to walk into a room and people are going to prejudge you or have these misconceptions about you. You're going to have these racial confrontations that are going to challenge you as a person. Like, how do I respond? How do I handle the situation? So we had a lot of those conversations. But I always taught them to be, compassionate, to be confident, and to be grounded in who they are and the values that I've taught them, right? So that's always been my focus. One of my sons, Vance, he wears his head in dreads. So he's had a number of instances, being pulled over by cops and questioned for nonsense. Oh, your lights weren't on, or oh, you didn't signal at this last sign. Or you were playing your music too loud. Just weird things that would happen. And I love that kid to death because he's handled it with class. He's handled it really similar to how I would have handled things. And all I can say is I do attribute that to the conversations we had, right? And the discussions we've had. So I feel that I've done a good job in that. But it's a challenge. I always talk to, my white friends, I shouldn't say my white friends, like there's only a couple. I have many friends that are of all different. You saw my group actually, with my main core group. There's a white guy, there's a Jewish guy, there's a Mexican guy, two black guys.
Sounds like you're all going to a bar and there's a joke.
Yeah, exactly, right? We're this totally melting pot of America, which is what I love. When we go out on trips, it's great because we really have all these different perspectives, and that's why I'm so close to these guys. But point being that we talk about that, and I tell them, you don't have those conversations with your kid, right? You don't tell your kid how to act if a cop pulls you over. Right. You don't have to tell your kid how to act when you're being followed in a store, how to act, when you're being accused of something you didn't do, which has happened to my sons as well. So it is interesting, but it's also interesting at the same time to see how my one son that has the dreads is I hate to say treated, but the experiences he has compared to my other son who wears his hair more natural, and maybe is more clean shaven and looks less intimidating or less whatever you want to fill in the adjective, whatever you want. His experiences are a lot different. He hasn't been pulled over. He hasn't had those kind of confrontations. He hasn't been questioned about things. Did you steal this or what happened? So it is interesting to see the different experiences between the two.
Yeah, that's amazing, and it's sad. And on behalf of your son, I'm sure you get ticked off. I'm sure you've moved past like the anger, but I get really rankled by that sense of injustice that would happen, right?
Yeah.
And as you start thinking about this next generation, you hope that these kind of moments go away, but in your book, there's a really powerful moment where you were in a bar in Sacramento and this guy from Tennessee is sitting next to you and you're getting drinks because you're a regular and they all know you, and he's not getting a drink, and he lands just an awful, spiteful phrase.
Yes.
And you're like, okay, how am I going to handle this and deal with that? Now, when I read that passage, Parish, I actually got a little bit tight. by reading it. I can't imagine how tight you got at the moment, right?
Yeah.
And you handled it with grace and connection. You ended up connecting, but that sense of having to have that moment and receiving that moment, is that the kind of stories that you talk to your sons about in terms of handling situations like that?
Absolutely. Yes, 100%. I intentionally tell my kids stories like that because I want them to see how to handle things, with grace and dignity, and not not reaffirm their beliefs, right? Or their prejudice or misconceptions they already have. That story was, in my opinion, one of the most powerful experiences in my life. Because at the time I was, I think my mid-20s. I was pretty young when it happened.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
You were still a forming.
I was still young. Yeah, exactly. And I had never in my life experienced a change from what I would say somebody who had a very racist mindset to someone that is inviting me back to visit their parents in Tennessee in such a short span. It was almost like if you wrote it in a story, it wouldn't be believable. People are like, that just doesn't happen. But it did. And it was one of those moments where even me and my friend Tony, the gentleman that was with me at the time, we still talk about it to this day because it was crazy. It was just an experience that we just couldn't believe that this person who, like you say, threw out such a negative racist, a horrible racist term to us at one moment, fast forward a few hours later, and you think we were best friends, and he even said, he's like, you guys are like, I have never met a Black person like you before in my life. I want to bring you home, almost like I was a trophy, right? I want to bring you home and show you
representing the experience.
Yes, right, exactly. But it was, again, it was that approaching the conversation with curiosity. Like, I could have responded with anger. I could have punched the guy, obviously, and done something and just reaffirmed. He would have walked away thinking the same thing he would have thought at the very beginning of that conversation.
That's right.
But when I approached it from an empathetic position and tried to, and I really, when I got him a drink from my friend, right, and gave him the drink, I really thought that was going to be the end of it. I'd give him a drink, he'd walk off, and that was it. So credit him that he actually took a moment to, apologize and try to actually engage with the conversation with us, because he could have taken a drink and walked away and kept his same mindset, but he didn't. So in that sense, I think in order for things to change, in order for us to get to where we truly want to be, it takes both of us to have those conversations. It takes a person like him that was willing to engage, and a person like me that's willing to challenge the misconceptions and stereotypes and have that real conversation.
Yeah, I think that message of one-to-one person real conversation is echoed through so many social conflicts we've had, right? Back in the day when I was growing up, I didn't know anyone who was gay. I didn't. They were. Right. I'm sure they were.
Exactly.
I didn't know.
Yeah.
Right. So I went to college where I met my first openly gay friend, and I was like, what? Oh, you're openly gay.
Yeah.
Huh. Okay. Yeah. I'm fine. But I was like, okay. I've never, and you can see though, how if someone has never met someone else from, and all you've heard about those quote unquote types of people, are there this or that, or this or that, or this or that, right? You come into meeting somebody, and for human beings, we're going to be wary and, approach people with some degree of either skepticism or trepidation, or just trying to sense who that person is. And if all of you've heard your whole life growing up is Santa Claus is real, Santa Claus is real, right? Black people are like this, gay people are like this, Spanish people are like, that's all you hear. You can see then how they would approach people with that perspective. But it only takes the conversation and the connections, to understand and to learn, and then hopefully, things change, right? But it's changed by such small degrees, by these small interactions, these small moments. Do you think that you have, through the course of your life, seen the dialogue get better, or does it pull back and get worse and get better? Does it like 2 steps forward and 1 step back? How have your dialogues gone as you've gotten older?
Ooh. I think in some ways it's gotten better, and then in some ways it hasn't. I'll say that, going back to I think it was maybe 2020 now, with a lot of the movement in social justice, because of all the things that were happening around our country. The dialogues became real, right? It was up front, and people were behind it. People wanted to really make changes and do things and talk about it. We were having those real conversations. But in the last, I don't know, 7, 8 months, 9 months. So the dialogue's changed. We're not having it anymore. And in a lot of ways, it's being erased, right? It's being taken away from even a part of our history. So those conversations that we were having before aren't happening anymore. And truthfully, that's why I'm so adamant about continuing to talk about DUI, because I feel there needs to be a voice, but there needs to be an educated voice. I think that's part of the problem, and how we got here where we are is because too many people capitalized on opportunities to maybe train or become a DEI professional, and they weren't teaching DEI. They were calling it DEI, but it wasn't DEI. And it led to, I think, where we are today with the kind of trying to cancel it out, right? Trying to get rid of it.
And the misunderstanding, right? The idea that, or translating, I think DEI means quotas. I think DEI means, that other people get blocked who shouldn't get blocked because we have to make a DEI hire, right?
Exactly.
There are all these, I think, misconceptions. And to me, and I read this a little bit differently when I was reading the book. To be honest with you, I didn't read the book through the lens of organizational structure or professional policy.
Yep.
To be honest with you, Parish, I read the book as, this is the life that I've lived, and I need to share with you the experiences that I have that you might not even be aware of, right? And if you're a Black person reading this, you could be like, yeah, I had a situation like that. Yep. If you're a white person reading that book, I'm like, I've never had a situation like that. Oh my God, you've had situations like that? That's terrible, right? And so to me, it was more revelatory in terms of, I'm just going to share with you in an unfiltered and an honest, but also I think in a real compassionate way, here's my lived experiences. And the book isn't angry. The book isn't, vindictive, right? It's not like, you terrible white people. It's none of that, right? Yeah. Right? Because look, I was born in 1970. I am not responsible for the Trail of Tears. I am not responsible for the Manzanilla internment camps, right? I didn't do any of those things, right? Yep. And so the idea, though, of revealing to the world some of your stories, I think, is so important because it gives people a better understanding of simply where you're coming from.
Yeah, you did. I'm glad you said that, because you actually did read the book from where I wanted it to come from. Because the subtitle, right, is One Man's Journey Through Privilege, Oppression, and Hope. So it is my journey, right? And
your journey is Parish's journey.
Yes, Parish's journey. And I wrote it and I used the narrative and used the stories because I do want to open up those conversations. I want to make it real and tangible to people, to just spark that conversation. The second book, which I'm working on now, will be more of organizational diversity. It will be a title around that. So I feel like now I've opened up the conversation. Now let's get real. How do we make this happen in an organization, right? One thing I wanted to point out, because I wanted to tell you this story, which it kind of really ties in a lot with what we've been talking about. About, I don't know, maybe a couple of months ago, I was at a conference and was invited to speak at a leadership conference. And I spoke on navigating change in an organization. And had a really, really fantastic speech. And a lot of people came up to me afterwards or talking to me. This one gentleman came up and he had said, you mentioned that you're a DEI professional, this and that. He goes, I would love you to come to my session. I'm going to be talking about DEI. It's in a couple of days at 10:30 a.m. Would you make it? I said, you know what? I'll come back to the conference and listen to you. He goes, yeah, I'd love to get your feedback, see what you thought. So I went in, I sat down at his session, and he started the session off in an interesting way. So what he did was he said, if you're white, male, and cisgender, please stand. And there was about maybe 50 people total in the room. And I'm going to say somewhere between 8 to 12 people stood up, male,
All right.
white, male, cisgender. And he says, everybody, all of you that are standing, you can leave now. This session is not for you. It's DEI, right? That was my face, right? That's my face myself. And I sat there, so I immediately wrote it down as a note. So afterwards, I came up to him and he said, so what'd you think of the presentation? I said, I said, you had some highlights. You did some really good things. I said, but I got to tell you, you really, really hit it wrong off the start. And he goes, well, what do you mean? I said, well, and I told him, I said, when you did that, what you did right there was shut down those people immediately. They're done. They probably didn't hear anything else you said for the rest of the event. I said, honestly, any people that are associated with them might have felt the same way. I said, the words are diversity, equity, and inclusion. Inclusion means everybody, right? I say, so you don't know those people. You don't know if they're military. You don't know if they're from some part of the other world that may not even be here in America. You don't know if they have a physical disability. There's all these things that qualify them under the diversity segment that you may have just disqualified them for. I say, so you need to change that approach at the beginning and make sure that everybody in the room understands they're all part of the DEI fight. They all fit. They may not fit in the race category. They may not fit in the religion category. They may not fit in the gender category, but they're going to fit in these other categories, right? And that's a lesson that I do. I told them in my courses, when I teach DEI, the first thing I do is show this diversity wheel, and it has all these different elements of diversity. And I have people pick out the 3 things that are most important to them that they identify with. Mm-hmm. And like I said, they'll put out some, a neurodiversity they may have. They'll point out, like I said, their military experience. They'll point out that they grew up in another country. They'll point out that maybe they grew up in the South, so their perspective's different, right? They may point out that they don't have a college degree, so their education is something that's always been in their head. There's all these different things that help people contribute to bring different experiences, different backgrounds, which is what diversity is about. So that to me is kind of part of the problem. And I think that we just got to make sure that as we move forward and we have these conversations, we are representing DEI in the proper fashion and making sure
and DEI in the proper fashion in the workplace. But I don't know, Parish, to steal the line, I have a dream, right? But the idea is that how could you not, right? How could you not have that dream of everybody living together well, right? Without these preconceived notions. And honestly, I'm naturally optimistic.
Yes.
As a person, I've got a joyful countenance. I'm hopeful. Just it's part of me, right?
Yeah.
Hopefully I could be included, right?
Yeah.
I'm not the cynic, right? Yeah. But one of the things that also gives me hope from a practical standpoint is that Generation Z, which is now your sons are Generation Z, my daughter's Generation Z. Factually, from the census, I know we still believe in facts, but from the census, it is the most diverse generation in the history of America. And the United States is projected to have no single ethnic majority around the mid-2040s. 15 years, right? 15 years, there's not a single ethnic majority in America. And the white population will be below 50% at that time. I have to believe that the conversations 15 or 20 years from now are going to be better than the conversations 15 or 20 years ago.
Yep.
Hopefully that better than they are even today. Do you think, like with your sons and my daughters, do you think with their conversations that this generation is having that they're going to get better and that this is going to be less of a burden?
So I would say, yes, I do believe so. And I don't think it's just because of the fact that this generation Z is going to be more diverse. I feel it's because of their experiences and their upbringing and the fact that they are being around more people unlike them, that they're asking the important questions. They're having the important discussions. They're experiencing other cultures, right? They're demanding inclusion in a lot of ways because a lot of people are their friends, right? They're people they grew up with. So when they see an injustice happening to them, they speak up, right? So I do believe that's happening. I do believe that there's we're experiencing this change that's going to happen with this next generation, that they're going to be much more thoughtful. But I also, at the same time, because they are asking questions, right, because they are more curious, we have to be intentional in the way that we're having these discussions and we're having these conversations, right? They have to be real. They have to be truthful. And we have to be willing to talk about race, prejudice, stereotypes. We can't avoid these conversations because with silence, nothing changes. So you have to have these dialogue. You have to have these conversations. So I encourage my kids who are part of the Generation Z, right, to always, be curious, have those conversations. If somebody says something that, raises your ears or makes you think, twice about them, be curious. Ask them, why did you say that? What did you mean by that? What does that mean to you? And try to have that experience, or try to hopefully change their perspective and just try to understand. Because I think understanding is kind of the first part of this, right? If you're willing to try to understand another person's perspective, it's going to help you grow as an individual, and it's going to help you have that empathetic response, right? Because you can see things from their angle, see things from their side. So that's important.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's the Walt Whitman, Ted Lasso. Be curious, not judgmental, right?
Yep. Exactly.
The idea that people are coming through lives, and I think one of the reasons, one of the things that I've learned just through being older is that there's no one way to live a life.
Yes.
And B, no one experiences the same thing the same way.
That's right.
Right. So my brother and I both lived in the same family structure that we had. And our family was kind of kooky, where my mom and dad divorced multiple times. We lived in many different houses. I had step families come in and I had step families leave. I had step brothers come in for a couple of years and then they left, and spouses come in and then they were gone. And we both experienced that experience. But my experience of it was different than his in terms of what I felt, my attachments, my ability to attach and detach. He was a little bit older, so that also has something to do with it, because when you're 7 and experiencing things, it's really different than 10. And when you're 10, it's really different than 13. And when you're 13, it's really different than 16, right? So you have these different experiences, but we can't then label to say, well, we both went through this really challenging childhood, so this blah, blah, blah. Because I was like, no, because my childhood actually was great. I mean, we had a lot of effed up things happen with our family, but my childhood was great. Yes. I loved my childhood. And he was like, I really want to get out of Pittsburgh. I hated my childhood. And I was like, okay, well, we experience it differently. I have to, and where I'm going with that, Parish, is that, like you even said, your 2 sons are experiencing being young Black men differently.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just of who 100%. They are.
Just who they are. Exactly. And when you look at it in that context, you're talking, like you say, people that grew up in the same family, home environment and experienced the world completely different. Right. So how could we not think that a Black person that grew up, here in California versus a Black person that grew up maybe in Texas, rural Texas, their life experiences are totally different. That's totally not the same person. Totally different, right? Totally different. They see the world completely different. So to think that they're the same, right, or put them in this one category, it's ludicrous in a lot of ways, I think. So it is. It's always interesting to me that we want to lump people in a group and think their experiences are the same or not. The one thing I will say, and the one, and not that you asked me, but if I was going to give my piece of advice to young or Gen X Zers, right? Travel the world, get out and travel. Because the more you experience other cultures and other experiences outside of maybe even North America, get out, it's going to open your eyes. You're going to realize that maybe a lot of things you've learned, or a lot of things you thought were true, or a lot of things you thought about this particular culture, it's different. And you're going to find out that, if you go somewhere like Spain, that you're going to see that diversity within that country, right? The different cities, the different foods, the different, attitudes, just, it's so different, right? You start learning those nuances that are mixed in with every single different culture. And you start seeing, I think, people as individuals, and it helps you change your lens and your viewpoint on the world. So that's one thing that I really think is important for people.
I think that's great advice. And for a youngster, if you don't have the means to travel the world, travel the country.
Travel the country. Yes. Yes,
right?
like I said, someone
Because,
from South is different than someone from California, right? Someone from New
yeah,
York is different. You're 100%. Get out and travel.
get out and travel.
Yeah.
So in growing up in Pittsburgh, a lot of people don't think it's very diverse. But what I will tell you growing up there in the 70s and 80s is Pittsburgh is in southwestern Pennsylvania.
Hmm.
We are only 90 minutes away from Morgantown, West Virginia.
Mm.
That's it. 90 minutes
Yep.
away. We are 45 minutes, 45 minutes north of Pittsburgh is Butler, and 45 minutes north of Butler is Slippery Rock and Chicora and East
Mm.
Brady. East Brady, Pennsylvania, very different than
Yeah.
Squirrel Hill in Pittsburgh,
Yes. Yeah.
right? And so
Yeah. Yeah.
so
That's a good point.
there is diversity even within that area,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
my dad at one point was living in a small town called Chicora, which is a little bit north of Butler. His next door neighbor had an oil well on his
Mm.
property, like a little
Wow.
oil well,
Yeah.
and you could call it Appalachia. Barbara Kingsolver would. She would say anything between northern Georgia and up to West Virginia and southwestern Pennsylvania would be considered Appalachia if you're not within the
Hmm.
cities. So there's diversity there, right?
Yeah.
There's diversity when you go to Savannah, Georgia, or
Yeah.
diversity when you go to South Carolina. I worked at Disney World this summer between high school and college. And when we drove up, we went through these back roads and I drove through Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, South Carolina, these small towns. That was extremely diverse for me.
Yeah.
We were looking at each other. We're like, oh my gosh, we could be on another planet, right? It's so diverse. So
Yeah.
I love
You're
your
100%
point,
right.
but I love your point about travel because
Yeah.
it's hard to see the world in a new way if you're only around the world that you've grown up in.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. I think too many of us, we stay in our little bubble, right? And we stay in our little comfort zone, and we aren't willing to kind of stretch our imaginations or go out and grow and experience things that are going to challenge our way of thinking. I was when I was at social work school in Texas, speaking of what you were talking about, I was living in Austin, but I was training Texas juvenile probation officers all throughout Texas. I mean, little towns way out in East Texas and West Texas, down in South Texas, in the Panhandle. And you go to those towns and like you say, it's completely different, right? It's a whole different way of living, a whole different life. So, and a lot of those people I'd meet there, they had never been out of those towns. They've grown up there through generations and that's where they've stayed. So you can see how they get set in their ways, right? They think that's the way to live. And you're right. If they just would travel a couple hours down the road and get into a major city and experience a different life, maybe it would change their perspective. Maybe it would change their viewpoint. So I think it was Mark Twain, right, that said travel. What did he say? Travel is the enemy of bigotry. Is that what he said?
I like it. He might not have said it, but I sure like it.
It's something around that nature. But it was a quote that basically says, get out and travel the world. It's going to open your viewpoints. It's going to open your perspective, and it's going to hopefully eliminate some of the prejudices and negativity we have in this world. So.
I love it. That's a great message, and that's a fantastic way to close. So I've got one question that I ask all my guests. Who is someone that you know that I don't know that I should meet?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. Someone I know that you don't know. It doesn't have to be someone famous. This can be anybody. I'm assuming you're asking me, right?
I'm hoping it's somebody that you know.
Yeah. It's funny because in the immediate person that popped into my head is my mom. So, my mom just holds a dear place in my heart. I think she is really one of a kind. She's an incredible.
She's still alive?
Special. She is. She's still alive. She's 84.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Go, Mom.
Still very active. Still gets out and does her walks, does her Zumba classes. And
I would love to meet your mom.
Yeah. She is. I think a lot of people who meet her, who know me, they say, okay, it makes sense now. I see why you are who you are, why you think the way you do, why you're so compassionate, and why you're so set on trying to open up people's minds to be better people and be a better person. So
that's
I think
great.
It'll make sense to you. She's a very, very strong, powerful lady. I really credit a lot of who I am to her. So she would be the person I would say.
I love it. I would love to meet your mom someday, Parish. And I am so grateful to have this conversation with you. And you are my friend. And I am so glad to know you and have you in my life.
Thank you, Chris. I feel the same, and I appreciate you allowing me this space and this time to talk about this, which I feel is a very important topic. And again, thank you for the conversation.
Absolutely. All righty. Have a great evening.
All righty. You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, yes. All right, Parish. What a great talk. Two guys talking about their life experiences. I think Parish is an incredible man. I think he's a very thoughtful man. I think that he not just experiences. I think he thinks about his experiences. I think he reflects on his experiences and how he thinks about them, right? He's a man who thinks about how he thinks. Gosh, what a breakthrough in terms of someone's evolution, in terms of their growth, in terms of being able to think about why they think certain things and how they move themselves forward, thinking a different way or thinking in a new way, and then applying those ideas in everyday life. So what did we learn from Parish? Man, I learned that everyone has their own experiences, yes, but someone like Parish has to have other types of challenges that I don't have, but he learns to live through them and with them. Why is inclusion a bad word? Who doesn't believe in equality? Don't we all think that we all have diverse thoughts and opinions and ideas? Isn't diversity, equality, and inclusion something we actually do all believe in and support? Now it can get conflated politically, but at its core, don't we all think that everybody has their own mind and their own right to be themselves, and they all come with different experiences into everyday moments? Of course we do. Well, listen, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I hope you joined the conversation. Visit menfolkjourneys.com. I'd love to talk with you, and I'd love to learn more about your story. Word bid Falarid.